Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm Jessica Flynn and I am the owner and maker of Flynn Sisters Boutique, and I'm really excited to bring you this video today. I'm going to show you how to create these beautiful resin pour charcuterie boards. These are great for serving hors d'oeuvres and cheeses and meats on, and really this is more of a decorative serving piece rather than a functional cutting piece. So you'll definitely want to let your people know what these are used for if you're gifting it or if you're selling these. And I gotta be honest with you guys, when I was researching how to make these, I was super intimidated, and none of the videos that I watched really made me feel confident or like empowered about what I was doing when I went to create these. So my goal for this video is to show you just how fun and easy these really can be. I'm going to list all of the products that you see below in the description box with a couple discount codes for you as well. And I think that's enough chit chat for me. I'm really excited about this video. Let's jump right in. All right, you guys, so the first step is picking out your colors and textures. I first chose the color palette that I wanted to go with, and then I picked out a couple different textures from each color in that palette. For example, I really like this emerald green, copper, and white color palette, so you'll notice I picked more than one texture for each color. If you want to go with the same colors and products that I used for my project, I will have these all linked down below in the description box. Next, we're going to prep our cutting board. The cutting board I'm using today is one that I found at Marshall's for $9.99. It was in the kitchen section. They had a huge selection there. You can also find these at Ross, TJ Maxx, Target, Amazon, all over, and they're fairly inexpensive. And I really like the look of this acacia wood. I love the color and the grain, so that's why I went with this. To clean this up, we're gonna first remove the price tags off the back. If you're having a hard time getting these off, a little bit of heat with your heat gun will help out a lot. And don't worry if there's any sticky stuff left on from the stickers, we're gonna take care of that later. Now, a lot of these cutting boards have like an oil finish to them. So we want to try and remove the oil finish from our board before we get started. I'm using a 120 grit sanding block, and I'm just going to lightly sand over my entire board. If you feel more comfortable using an orbital sander or something, or a jitterbug, you definitely could use that also. I'm just stubborn and I really like my sanding blocks. So I'm going to really focus my sanding along the edges. The edges of our board will be the most vulnerable bonding point of our epoxy to the board. So I really want to make sure that I can create strong adhesion on those points. So I really want to focus on getting the oil removed from those sections. I'm sanding the whole board, and then I'm going to clean it off with rubbing alcohol in a paper towel. If you want to use tack cloth or whatever, you could definitely do that instead. Just, you probably don't want to rinse your board at this stage because we don't want to have any moisture lingering on the wood when we go to pour our epoxy. This step was the most intimidating step for me because none of the tutorials that I went over explained this to me very well, and I didn't understand if it was even necessary to prep my board. But after starting one for myself, I quickly found you should definitely prep your board. And it's not that hard. It's just a quick sanding and a wipe down. Okay, after we got that all done, I'm going to cover the back in painter's tape, and you do want to have about a 1 inch overlap or so around all the edges of the board. After I have the whole back covered in tape, I'm going to go over it with a vinyl scraper. You could do this with a credit card too, and really press down the edges of that tape as well as you can. Another great reason why we sanded the whole board is because we really want this painter's tape to bond tightly to the back of our board so we don't get any epoxy seepage later on. I'm using a craft knife to trim off the excess tape. Be very careful you don't cut yourself on this part, and try to get the tape as cleaned up as you can. I'm going to make sure that my board is set on a level surface that's elevated. I've just got this on a cookie sheet lined with parchment paper on 2 clear plastic cups, and I've got my level here. And I've also got my board in a safe location where I can leave it to dry and I won't get any debris or dust falling on it once it's done. Next, I'm going to measure out my epoxy. For this project of this size, you'll probably want to have about 4 to 6 ounces of epoxy. I like to measure my epoxy amounts out with water and mark my clear plastic cup first. And then I'll just pour out that water after I make my marks and dry out my plastic cup with some coffee filters. And then I just measure out my epoxy and start mixing. For this amount of epoxy, I probably mixed I think I was mixing for about 15 minutes. I don't know. I just put on my favorite YouTuber and I watch a video or two. And before I know it, my epoxy is nicely mixed, no streaks, and it's totally clear. I'm now ready to divide my epoxy. I'm dividing it into seven different medicine cups. And then we're going to color all of our epoxy. All right, and then when you're adding your glitter, make sure you're not adding too much. You definitely don't want to make your epoxy too thick. So really we're just adding enough to cover the top of our epoxy in the medicine cup here, and then we will mix really well to evenly distribute all of that beautiful glitter all the way through the epoxy in that little pot. For the mica colors I'm using, I just want to add a good size scoop. I think I do a couple scoops of these because I really want to make sure that they're super pigmented for this project. This is Chrysalis from Simply Sarah's Custom Creations, and you just want to add in your scoops of mica colors and again mix really well to evenly distribute the color. For this green mica powder, I did add a little bit of black because it just wasn't quite the shade I was looking for. So you guys, don't be afraid to mix your different mica colors to really create the color and shade that you're looking for. For my epoxy dye, I'm using Alumilite white epoxy dye. It's my favorite. And you really just need 1 drop for that little medicine cup, and that is plenty. A little bit goes a long way with that stuff. All right, and then you want to make sure that you have 1 medicine cup that is just all clear epoxy. You'll see why later on in the video. And then once I've got all my colors mixed together, I'm just going to hit the tops of my medicine cups with my torch really quickly, really lightly, very carefully. This is just going to pop any of those bubbles that rose to the surface while we were mixing stuff up. To start our pour, I'm going to start with this Chrysalis mica color. This is that beautiful rose gold copper that I'm obsessed with this color. It's so beautiful. And what we're going to create here first when we start pouring our design is what will be the focal point of our design. I thought this was really helpful. I got this technique from Nicole Merritt from her video on how to do these cutting boards. I will link her video down below. And I really loved how she started with her stones or her fire glass first, because I felt like you could build your whole design from this one starting point to make things a lot easier. The fire glass that I'm using is actual fire glass for like outdoor fireplaces and stuff. And you get a 10-pound bag of mixed colors for $29.99. And when I say a 10-pound bag, I mean a 10-pound bag. It's a lot of stones. But it's beautiful glass and it's not really sharp. It's not like something that's going to cut your hands. So don't worry about that. And we're just going to place it nicely in the small river of epoxy that we created. And you do want to try and get it to lay pretty flat. And you want those stones to be placed kind of randomly with no real pattern. And if you want to add a little more, you can add more. From this point moving forward in pouring the resin, it's going to be completely up to you guys and your creative freedom on how you want to do this. I just kind of let the epoxy speak to me, and I made it up as I went along. I had no plans going into this. The only thing I knew is I was going to start with my fire glass situation here and kind of go from there. So have fun with this, relax. Take your time, but also keep in mind that you do have a limited amount of time with the pot life of your epoxy. I'm using DIY epoxy, and I think this is the perfect epoxy for a project like this. This epoxy does have a pot life of 30 to 40 minutes. So while you do have a good amount of time to put all of this together, you want to keep like a watch or a timer or something so you know where you're at in that pot life so that your epoxy doesn't start to cure in the middle of everything that you're doing, and it would be a mess. So be mindful of that. You also want to make sure that you are working in a well-ventilated area and that you follow all of the safety guidelines outlined in your epoxy's safety data sheet. Okay, and at some point I wanted to spread out some of the colors, so I just picked my board very carefully up off those cups and tilted it downward to let gravity do the job to pull down some of the epoxy, and it gave me a little more coverage and widened those lines. Also, when I was reaching the end of my design here, I added a line of clear epoxy, which you'll see why later. And then I used my heat gun to try and get some movement out of these colors and add some blending. This is going to soften the lines between my colors. Don't worry if your epoxy is rolling off the sides of your project. That's really what we want, because to me, I really like the look of having that full coverage along the edges of the board. Okay, so I'm pretty much pleased with where I'm at with my project so far. So at the very end here, I'm going to add in some white lacing with my white dyed epoxy. I'm going to run a very thin line right along that clear line that I added towards the end there. You don't want to add too much. And once I've got that laid down, I'm going to take my heat gun and just blow right up against it to push it up and over that clear epoxy. Once I've got the amount of like feathering that I want out of that white epoxy, I'm going to get my heat torch and I'm going to blow it with my torch, which is going to create some beautiful lacing and cells through that white line of epoxy. I did add a little bit more of this fire glass to this corner here just as some extra finishing touches. I felt it just kind of rounded out this other side of the board really nicely. And then I took some of that clear epoxy and I just lightly drizzled it over the fire glass. Don't drag it over the fire glass and don't pour it, don't add too much. Just really lightly drizzle that clear epoxy over the glass just to take away some of the sharp edge. I'm going to go over the whole piece lightly with my torch, and then I'm going to touch up the sides with any extra epoxy that I have left over with a gloved finger just to make sure everything smoothly ran over the edge to create a nice seamless look. I'm also going to run a gloved finger along the bottom very carefully just to remove any real excess amount of drips. You can tilt your board again just to get a little bit more movement, but I would really be careful in doing this so you don't mess up that beautiful white lacing around the edge. So this is what we came up with. I absolutely love it. It turned out so beautifully. I had so much fun creating this. I let this dry for a good 18 hours. And next we're ready to finish the piece. So I'm going to start by removing all of the tape off the back. And when we get to the tape that's against the epoxy there, I'm going to run my heat gun along it to make it easier to remove the tape that's stuck on there with the epoxy. Make sure you're not using your heat gun too much to where you're going to damage the finish on your epoxy. Just enough to heat it up so that it's easier to pull up with the tape. Finally, we're going to sand away any imperfections from the back, and we're going to finish this with some oil. I've got a 60 grit sanding block, and I'm just going to sand any rough spots of epoxy from the edge, being careful not to damage the finish of the epoxy that's shiny on the side, if that makes sense. So I'm just really sanding down a little bit of that harsh corner and kind of sanding away anything that seeped through my tape in the back. You'll notice that I've got some green parts on the back that I just really couldn't sand down, and what that was super pigmented mica epoxy that actually stained through the wood. I probably could have sanded it off if I cared to sand for a really long time, but I don't have that kind of time. So I just sanded it as well as I could. I sanded the rest of the back of the wood so it would have an even finish. I wiped it clean with a dry cloth. And then to restore the shine and protection on the wood, we're going to be using this butcher block oil. You could use like walrus oil and stuff to do the same thing. I'm just using a clean rag, and I'm going to rub this into just the wood parts of my piece here. This is going to help protect that wood. It's going to restore the shine and remove any impurities that might have been left on the wood during this process. And it's just going to be a really nice professional way to finish off our piece. I did spend a good solid 5 minutes rubbing this into all surfaces of our wood, and I was just left with such a beautiful even finish. So remember in the beginning when we talked about being scared of damaging that wood finish by doing the prep work and the sanding? Don't be afraid. This is just a piece of wood. We can restore the shine. This butcher block oil is fabulous, and this just turned out so great. I don't know why I waited so long to do this. It was such an easy and gratifying project. I am so obsessed. Can't wait to make another one. You guys do want to let these sit for at least 7 days to fully cure before you gift them and start using them. And that's it. So I hope you guys love this video. If you have any advice for me, put it down in the comments. If you guys love this video, if you want to see more projects like this, let me know. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you soon. If you love this video, you could check out our last video here. Also be sure to find us on Instagram, Facebook, Pinterest, and of course subscribe for all our new videos that come out every Wednesday and Saturday. Thanks so much for watching. See you soon.